All right, welcome back to the channel, everyone. On this episode, we have a very special guest, Prostorm, here to talk about Kristyasworn and kind of give me and all of you an introduction to playing this deck. Welcome, Prostorm.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Big fan of the channel.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. For those of you who don't know, I ran into Prostorm and met him for the first time at YCS Niagara, and I brought up to him that I was probably going to be transitioning to playing decks outside of just Amaryllis since I'm not going to be traveling for anything in person in a while. So I figured online tournaments would be a good time to test out new strategies. And he said, not to be biased, but you should try Kristyasworn. And I saw he went X2 at the event, bubbled out, which is pretty good showing. And you know what? I figured it would be cool to bring him on and kind of give myself and all of you an introduction to the deck. So, what exactly drew you to playing Kristyasworn?
Right. Yeah, I think there's a multitude of factors. First and foremost, I mean, everyone knows the big three right now is Black Wings, Vayu, and Hero Frog.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, I'm pretty confident playing each of those decks, but I feel like the head-to-head against each of the big three is very coin toss driven. A lot of it comes down to RPS or how well you draw against someone else, and I don't think the skill differential plays a big enough impact in tilting matches in your favor. So I feel like if you want an edge at a certain event, you should be playing something no one else is really playing, something that people don't really have side deck hate for. And so that's why I thought this one was a pretty good pick into the meta. I still think it's really strong despite it winning. I don't think that many people are citing anymore for it at the moment. I think like I mean, it doesn't even have to be Kristyasworn, but just Lightsworn in general has a
Yeah.
pretty good Blackwing matchup. As a Blackwing player myself, I hate playing against Lightsworn the most, and that's a sentiment that a lot of my fellow online peers kind of resonates with them. Just because, Honest always beats Kalut, Concentrated, Decreed, they just stop Blackwings from playing the game,
Yeah.
and it's just really oppressive. And for Frogs, it's very similar, right? Like JD doesn't care about duplocks, and the Christias engine just really shuts down Monarchs and Substitute, and Master Restrict is like another floodgate that just stops them from playing. So I think that's another really strong matchup. And Vayu Turbo was like the one that I felt closest to 50-50. But I felt like, yeah, playing Lightsworn into the big three had pretty good spreads. And I feel like if you want to win an event, playing something different gives you a better chance than playing something everyone else in a room is familiar with and already has a very solid game plan and sideboard for. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and that's kind of why, like, when it comes to me trying out new decks, like, I'm going to be sticking to those decks that are a bit not necessarily underexplored, but maybe less representation when it comes to in-person events, kind of like Amaryllis. It's you don't see too many of them at an event, and I feel like with Lightsworn and whatnot, like it's a bit more popular, but it's still not in that upper echelon of like you expect to play Frogs, Value, and Black Wings at every tournament you enter. A big thing that led me to wanting to talk to you specifically is when I saw your deck profile. When I was playing back in the actual time period for Edison, I played Lightsworns. I was also a young kid, so I
Nice.
didn't have Judgment Dragons. I played like Lila Celestia Turbo. Like it was horrible. I think I may have won one match at locals ever. But it's super nostalgic for me, and I kind of like that your build still has like a very heavy Lightsworn emphasis in it. Like the Triple Wolf, I figured I see a lot of people cutting it down to one, and I'm like, if I want to play any kind of Lightsworn build, like I would kind of want to just max out with the Lightsworn engine as much as possible, and then like
Sure.
tinker it from there, right? Instead of just like preemptively cutting it in favor of like different fairies, or like I saw people like would play stuff like what was it, Shire? Or is that the Lightsworn that's a fairy level
Yeah,
four?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different, I guess, ways to approach it. I think usually it's pretty well accepted. There's like three different versions that are
Hmm.
quite popular. One is pure, where you just run 2JD, you don't run the fairy engine, you don't
Yeah.
run any darks. And that one, I don't really like because it has a very low boss density
Hmm.
because you only have the 2JDs. and then there's the Twilight version, which James Hart really popularized. I think that one's quite strong because you have the Dad, you have the Chaos Orc, you have the main deck Crows. And I think the main weakness with that deck is it struggles a lot against like Battle Fader type decks because you don't really have a way to stop the special summon. So I've seen like deck outs and stuff like that happen just randomly, which is a bit annoying, but it's definitely not a common thing, right? But that's like I think a cool take on it. And then on the Kristyasworn side, you have a few different ways to approach it. You have there's some lists like Smoker was the one who originated like the 3 hamster, 3 snowplow, 3 Kristya version with no wolves.
Yeah,
That one was quite strong as well. And yeah, I kind of took it a bit different of a direction because I personally like wolves. I know a lot of people think it's very bricky, but I personally just found having wolves in hand was never any different than having like some other brick in hand, like the Soul Pals or extra Kristyas. And wolf, like there's so many different ways to convert the Garnet in this deck. You have Recharge, of course, you have Lumina, and you have Beckoning, and it's just it's just the cost of doing business with this deck. Because sure, sometimes you'll draw it, but like milling a wolf is just so advantageous for your game plan, and especially like in the GB meta, I thought and the Black Wings wolves are just really strong. I think playing without them is just putting yourself at a handicap. So yeah, that's kind of how I settled on my version. I always describe it to people as it's still a traditional Lightsworn list. It's not so much a Kristyasworn because the focus is still on the Lightsworns. But you have that fairy package to augment and just fill in those last couple of slots in the deck where you have a secondary boss to pair with to make Beckoning really strong. Because if you don't have the Kristia's Heralds, Beckoning gets a lot weaker because you really only have JD and Honest. And so now you can set up boards where instead of holding JD for a lethal push, you can drop it early and you have the Herald stuff to protect it from the clapback, whether it be Dark Harm or like a Nab-Zero Crash or Brio Bounce, things like that. And yeah, that's kind of how I settled on it. And when you don't play too many fairies, you don't run a risk of overmilling. I think it's pretty cool because I don't want to play bricks like Soul Pal to just manipulate and recorrect my graveyard. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot more we can discuss on stuff like that, but that's kind of in a nutshell how it is.
Yeah, for sure. And like you've said a lot of things that kind of align with my mindset and things I was trying to do with the Amaryllis build is Amaryllis in its standard form has one boss monster and it's Titanial. It's very telegraphed. It's very obvious what the deck is trying to get to. So in this deck, if you cut out all the fairies, everyone knows it's like, okay, I can save all my interruption for the Judgment Dragon. And it's kind of like, it's hard to play a long tournament like that because good players are going to be able to set up and protect and play against the one play that they know you're going for. So being able to add stuff like, I think being able to play Herald is just unbelievable, especially with like the triple Celestia. It just feels like it's a card that shouldn't exist in Edison format. Like it's such a high ceiling card, and just being able to play it alongside the Judgment Dragons, alongside Honest, which is such a crazy card in its own right. And then of course Kristya. It just feels like there's so many ways to play every single hand versus, like you said, a traditional Lightsworn list. It's pretty obvious what's trying to happen, and I feel like the inclusion of the triple Beckoning Light, that's one of my favorite cards to play in Lightsworn. And like you said, it just gets so much more of an impact when you can add back 4 different targets that are very impactful versus just Judgment Dragon. So I'm a big fan of your list, and it's definitely the one I'm going to be like starting my Kristyasworn journey on, because I feel like you've taken a lot of the things that I would have done as a deck builder had I had more experience with Lightsworn and took it upon myself to try and build a list. I feel like this would be like the perfect vision of how I like to play the game, right? So I'm just a big fan of it. But
yeah, definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I would say myself, I've played Kristyasworn. Like I said, I played Lightsworn when I was younger, and then when I got into Edison and I sold off all my modern stuff, the first deck I built was Lightsworn, just a pure Lightsworn deck, and I didn't play with it for too long because I started exploring more avenues of Edison and started playing Amaryllis obviously at some point. But talk to me as if I'm a beginner. What are things that a lot of people who pick up a Lightsworn deck maybe get wrong, or maybe plays that they don't see as impactful? Or is there anything about this deck that, in your mind, as someone who's played it for a while now, that maybe people seem to overlook as like very valuable interactions or valuable cards in the list that like might get overlooked if you're new to playing this deck?
Right. There's definitely, I think, a lot of key decision points that separate, good players from great players. So the first off is Goldsark. And this isn't just particular to my list, but Goldsark in general. So many Lightsworn players, for some reason, just are always sarking for JD when it's like not the right play, maybe 60% of the time. And I mean, I can deep dive into that first before I get into some of the other topics. But
Yeah, for sure.
for example, like if your hand is like more than two Lightsworn names, it's almost always going to be sarking for recharge. Because I place a high emphasis on card activity. And if I have, like, let's say Lila, Garroth, and Jane in hand, that's 3 summons, and you can only use 1 summon a turn, so you're effectively playing down like -2, right?
Yeah.
So that's like one thing. I want to like maximize the activity of my hand. And because usually Lightsworns you lose when you draw like too many summons, because the Lightsworn starters outside of Lila and Raikou aren't particularly good.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And if I'll only start for JD if I have like a very clear avenue that I know for sure it's going to be live by the time it arrives. Otherwise, I'm just going to trust I'm going to find it later off Beckoning, because we do play 3. And yeah, because let's say you start for JD and then you run out your Lila out into Bottomless or something. Well, now you're missing like mills and you might get rushed down, and so that Sark doesn't make sense. So that's like the first thing, what you Sark for. The second thing that I think comes up a lot is when to set your traps, like T-Roar and Beckoning. I see a lot of people like try to set their T-Roars early, which doesn't always make sense to me. Because T-Roar, it's tricky because there's so many different game states where you might want to set it early, but you might want to hold it later. Let's say like turn 1, if I'm setting Raikou, right? Like obviously there's no reason to set a T-Roar.
Yeah.
Or if I run out of Lila, and I have an Honest in hand, I'm not really afraid of your battle phase, so I want to hold the T-Roar. And T-Roar is most impactful for when you drop JD, and there's no when you drop JD and then you want to set T-Roar behind it, because that insulates you from the BrainCon clapback.
Yeah.
But if you set T-Roar like too early and then you drop JD, you're blowing up your own T-Roar. Or if you know you're going to drop JD the next turn, you're kind of T-Roaring the previous turn for very low value, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a pretty important decision point of when to set T-Roar. I guess another situation that comes up is guaranteeing Celestia, right? Like, maybe turn 1 you have a play where you could just go like normal summon Jane, set T-Roar because you have Celestia in hand. And that could be like a pretty powerful play, but you also have to ask yourself, depending on the matchup, is it likely that they actually run over the Jane? Do you think it'll just survive the turn and then you can save the T-Roar for later? So there's, I think, a lot of nuances in when to set your traps. Beckoning is also like in a similar vein. Like if you set it too early and it's not live, and they use removal on it, whether it be Raikou Kais or MST, you can't even chain it, because Beckoning is weird. You can only activate it if there are the same or more lights in your grave than in your hand.
Yeah.
So usually for me, it's like I only really want to set it if I can chain it the next turn.
That makes sense.
And,
yeah. Otherwise, you're just setting as a bluff. Like it doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I mean sometimes it's like, but it's a bit weird too, because it is a trap. So if you're anticipating a lot of mills in the end phase, you might want to get it down.
Like if
or if your hand quality is like really bad. Like let's say you're on like multiple wolves, even though you don't really want to fire the beckoning early, you're glad to trade the multiple wolves for like even an honest engrave, right? That's already a massive improvement in terms of hand quality. But I think those are like, without getting into too much more detail, like some pretty important decision points that you need to face. And then when you resolve beckoning, I think that's very tricky as well. Not many players it can get very tricky, especially post-board, because when you add stuff back, you want to usually drop JD and also Kristya at the same time and have like Herald protection. But you need to consider how to add the cards back so that you can play through Honest. So you can play through DD Crow.
Yeah.
So yeah, for example, if you get to like 4 fairies and then they Crow, so now you're only at 3, your Kristya might be dead. So sometimes it makes sense to like add back more fairies and then try to Herald something. Sorry, it's super abstract, but like it's definitely come up before watching like a couple other like high caliber players play and seeing how they make those decisions. But I think that's like a pretty tricky decision in of itself. And other decisions, I think even like something like recharge, it seems pretty obvious to just fire a recharge usually. So I'm of the camp that you should always shotgun the recharge game 1 when you have Sarks and you kind of want to dig for Gold Sark. But there are instances where it makes sense to hold the recharge. Like, let's say you have, I'm just throwing an example out there. Let's say you have like set Raikou, and then you have a Lightsworn in hand, like a couple of Lightsworns in hand, and you're not really worried about them dust shooting and turning off your recharge, but you want to make a more informed decision turn 2 on what to throw away. Because let's say you're deciding between a Lila and a second Raikou, right?
Yeah.
You don't know if you'll need to keep the Lila to out a floodgate like oppression, or if you need to keep the Raikou because they established a Caius or Vanity's Fiend and you need to out that, right?
Yeah,
That's like another mistake I think people make. It's you set your Raikous too early because it's a good turn 1 set, but then it's your only out to like a Dinah or a Vanities or Ab-Zero, and then those monsters give you trouble later because you threw your Raikou away too early. So that's like something to consider. It doesn't come up a lot, but it's more so just being cognizant of which Lightsworn monsters they keep in hand and the utility they represent.
I like that. No, that's a great point. It's too easy to see a card that says draw 2 and just be like, well, why wouldn't I play this, right? So it's a great tip. It's something I feel like I've gotten better at, but I'm still like, sometimes it's hard to read those situations where you're like, if I just be patient, it'll pay off in the long run. Because it's Yu-Gi-Oh's a constant struggle of when to actually make those pushes and when to actually use your cards to try and establish a board. And if you do it at the wrong time, then you can just lose a duel on the spot and not realize it for a few turns. So that's fantastic info.
Yeah, I mean, it's still probably correct to be firing it most of the time. I just remember a few instances when I was testing online where I fired it when I probably didn't need to because I had sided up my Sarks, and I ended up drawing a wolf. Or I remember like I threw away a higher quality Lightsworn and drew like 2 worse Lightsworns. So that kind of happened, but it also could have happened like I drew into beckoning and something else to further my play. So it's just very contextual depending on the situation, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I love it. And I guess for the final thing for getting into this deck for myself and anyone out there who's new to the deck is, I know you talked a lot about good matchups, like pretty good matchups into the Frogs and Blackwings, especially Blackwings, but what are some of the harder matchups, I would say? Because I know you mentioned Value's closer to a 50-50, but is there any matchup out there that you find like scary where you're like, this could be problematic in a tournament if I start running into this deck a bunch?
Yeah, so I think GBs for sure are one of the tougher matchups. I think GBs in general are usually pretty tough for Lightsworn. But I don't think it's that bad for us just because we have double oppression, we have the Heralds, we have the Wolves. Most of our Lightsworns are bigger than the GBs. And then postboard, like I was citing a lot of hate like Book of Moons, Bottomless, and the Sidra, and that tended to do well, but it's still not a matchup I really enjoy, and I think it's probably a bit favored for GBs. Anything that plays Skill Drain or Light Mirror. So zombies is actually kind of annoying. You know, we have Herald and Kristya and Oppression. They have Skill Drain, Light Mirror, and they can get to Stardust pretty quickly. And that's kind of annoying. Like Stardust and Skill Drain is really hard for us to deal with. So that's like not a great matchup, I think, but it's not bad either. It's probably close to 50-50. Obviously macro decks are pretty bad, but I mean, three Lilas to pop the Defissures and Decree, and I can't imagine being that bad.
Yeah.
And Oppression for like DB Survivor, but still, you don't want to play against that, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I'm just trying to think. And I think the biggest, scare is just the deck wrecking. Like, if the deck does what it's supposed to do, like there's not a single matchup out there that's bad. Because Beckoning is just so flexible. You can get JD, you can get Kristya, you can get Honest, you can get Heralds, you can get Celeste. It's just depending on the situation, you can tailor it, and you have access to all these different floodgates, right? Like masks for frogs, oppression, decree. You can side iron walls if you want, and So I think it's really. I don't think there's. Oh, sorry, I just remembered. I think anything with Guacamole Drago is pretty scary.
Yeah, that's
just because
any of the Dragon decks.
Yeah, that just kind of shuts you down completely. And you only have Jane, Card Trooper, and Honest to get over the Drago. So yeah, that's definitely a bit scarier, but it's not too popular of a pick. So yeah, I think as long as you're not too bricked, because that's like, I guess, the biggest flaw of the deck, just bricking on Wolves and inactive Kristyas or JDs. So if you avoid that problem, like, it should be mostly smooth sailing.
Yeah, and hey, I come from a background of playing a even brickier deck, so I'm probably going to find it not an issue at all, but that might just be like a mental aspect of coming from Amaryllis to playing Kristyasworn. But no, that was...
Sure. I mean, like, every deck bricks a lot, right? Like, even Blackwing, you'll get a lot of hands with like double Blizzard Vayu or double Blizzard, double Sirocco. And with Vayu, you'll get like, double Vayu Necro. And Frogs, you'll get like all Frog hands or all Hero hands, and it's just very low activity. So it's definitely a problem that plagues every deck, and I don't think that should steer you away from playing this, because I think every deck bricks similarly. And I always tell my friends too, if you think about it, everyone says Blackwings are super consistent because of 2 Black Whirlwind and 1 Dark Arm, right? Well, if you think about it, Lightsworn has 3 Recharge and 2 Wolves. Like 3 Recharge and 2 Wolves, it's just, you have... Because everyone's complaining about like Recharge, right? When Lightsworn opens Recharge, it feels like, oh, JD's online, they're digging through their deck, they're milling their Wolves. It's like, yeah, I mean, we played 3 Recharges, right? It's to be seeing them, so yeah.
No, it's a great point. I think Lightsworn, while it can have those hands where it's just like a bunch of normal summons, you can't really do too much, but like it's far and few between. And I feel like the power level of a deck like Kristyasworn, especially this build here, like it just plays such a high ceiling of like boss monster, and like just the quality of the cards in the deck are so much higher than that of its peers, that the trade-off of you might lose a game once in a while because you open like double Kristya, double JD, and like no normal summon or something like stupid like that. But I feel like you said, you shouldn't be deterred. And like I always said that with Amaryllis, because everyone's like, well, the deck's not good because you just brick on level 8. So I'm like, yeah, but you can play through it if you build the rest of the deck well around it. And the way this list here is it's pretty sound. So I'm looking forward to trying it out and bringing it to my first online tournament whenever I get around to actually signing up for one. So
yeah, for sure, that's good to hear, and I'm always curious to hear any thoughts or feedback, because it's just my personal take with some adjustments from some friends, but there's always things to be improved upon, and different people might find different ratios or ideas to work better for them. So yeah, it's by no means the best list for sure.
No, and I feel like that's the right mindset to have. Is there should never be a consensus on this is the way to play it, because play styles vary from player to player, and just some tournaments a certain card like maybe Herald in the Orange Light's better at 3 for one tournament, and then it wouldn't be as impactful in another tournament. It all depends on your matchups and just like the players you end up playing against. So if there's anything else you wanted to mention about the deck before we hop off here, you already gave me more time than I asked for, so the floor is yours to say anything or talk about anything, and then we'll wrap this up.
Right, I guess I don't have too much to say besides I'm not really a big fan of playing Lightsworn mirrors because it can be pretty sassy.
That's fair.
But yeah, it's just, you know, sometimes, but I do think like heralds make such a big difference. I think I was playing someone on ladder a few weeks ago where it looked so hopeless because they went first and they had a hamster, they sarked for JD, and but Herald cooked and like bottomless stopped the JD and they just were out of gas, and the beckonings made a big difference. So it's yeah, I think the games are generally quite fun because there's a lot of different ways to interact with different types of decks, and everyone loves milling, right? Like milling, drawing cards, fixing your hand with beckoning, dropping big bosses, and blowing the field up. It's nice to be on the end of Cold Wave JD. It sucks to be on the other end, but
that's fair.
Yeah,
it's understandable.
Yeah.
But no, awesome. I can't thank you enough for coming on and doing this. It's kind of in a weird spot for me right now, trying to branch out of the only thing I've made content on so far, which is Amaryllis, and prepping to play Amaryllis at a big tournament. So having you come on here and kind of introduce me to a new deck to play and kind of use it as a jumping off point to branch out into more diverse content, it's very much appreciated for me, so thank you. And yeah, if anyone ever runs into Prostorm at another event, he is just a wonderful person. So it was great getting to meet you, and again, thank you for coming on and doing this interview.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks for having me, and happy to have joined for this session. Hope I was of some help.
Awesome. No, it's very helpful, and I don't feel like I'm just going in blind. So that was kind of the goal of this, and I feel better about it already. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
All right. See you guys in the next one. Cheers. Hey there. Appreciate you sticking around to the end of this video. If you liked what you just watched, please check out one of the recommended videos or playlists on screen. If you enjoy content on Edison Yu-Gi-Oh! Including deck profiles, deck building theory, meta and card discussions, as well as retro video games, I would appreciate it if you subscribed and gave this video a like. I am Chris Lindsay of No Suck Gaming. Thanks for watching.